That interview guy for IFL, that new interview guy that did the interview with Anthony Joshua recently, actually did a pretty good job. Anthony Joshua right now, he has a lot to prove, not only to himself, obviously, but to fans, because now fans are hungering, including myself, who has been following his career and covering all his fights since he's turned pro. We want to see him fight better competition. But the question I have now is the better competition that we want to see him fight even there? When it comes to the top 20 heavyweights, I'm going to just read them off to you. Now, they're not in any particular order. I'm going to read them off to you. You got Tyson Fury, Vladimir Klitschko, Alexander Povetkin, Deontay Wilder, Kubrat Pulev, Luis Ortiz, Charles Martin, Malik Scott, Erkan Teeper, Antonio Tarver, Joseph Parker, Steve Cunningham, Carlos Takam. I said Joseph Parker already, Tony Thompson, Zara Glaskov, Dominic Brazil, Bermain Stavern, Ruslan Chagiev, Derek Chisora. Do you see him fighting any of those guys for his next fight, which is, what is it, April the 9th, 2016? I don't. I mean, maybe Carlos Takam. Let's go through the names, actually, of these top 20 heavyweights. Like I said, they're in no particular order. I'm not saying, when I say these guys' names, I'm not saying this guy's better than this guy. I'm just reading 20 heavyweight names. Tyson Fury is fighting Vladimir Klitschko, so that eliminates those two. Alexander Povetkin is waiting for Deontay Wilder. That eliminates those two. Kubrat Pulev is supposed to be fighting Derek Chisora. That fight is done already. We just don't know when. It's going to be. Luis Ortiz is in the WBA tournament, so that's self-explanatory. He can't fight. Charles Martin, actually, from what we've been hearing, the rumors is Charles Martin's team has reached out to Anthony Joshua, and Anthony Joshua is ranked very high, if not number one, if I'm correct, not number one by the IBF. So he could go that route, but it's not, from my understanding, if you got that title shot right there waiting for you, and it's against a guy like Charles Martin, who I feel Anthony Joshua can beat, even though when it comes to Charles Martin, we still don't know too much about him. Why? It's because there's limited footage of him on the internet, and the fight with Zara Glaskov ended early because Zara Glaskov got hurt. So there's a potential for danger there against Anthony Joshua. But at the same time, it's a title shot. So I'm thinking, why not go forward if it is true? Now, on Charles Martin's side, Charles Martin, has to fight a mandatory of either Anthony Joshua or Joseph Parker. And I forgot who else there is sometime within a year or so. So he's thinking, well, if he can get that April bout against Anthony Joshua, he can make some pretty big money, especially maybe $1 million plus, especially with Al Heyman backing him. I don't know how much Anthony Joshua will make in that fight. But right now, it seems as though that should be the perfect sense for Anthony Joshua. I understand that he wants to keep building up his name, and I understand that he's creeping up in the rankings behind Deontay Wilder and Alexander Povetkin to be the WBC champion or to fight for the WBC title. I understand that, Joseph Parker is number one by the WBO and has called him out. He's not in the WBA tournament. So really, it's between the WBC, which he's ranked right behind Alexander Povetkin. Remember, Alexander Povetkin is the mandatory for Deontay Wilder. It's the IBF who now have him up there high, if not number one, if I'm correct, in the rankings. And then you have the WBO, which Anthony Joshua is number two behind Joseph Parker. The WBA are having a tournament, so right now Anthony Joshua can't get a WBA shot within the next 2 years, in my opinion. So I'm wondering, why not a Charles Martin? Let's go down the list. You have a Malik Scott, who walked out with Dylan White during the Anthony Joshua versus Dylan White fight, and then started trashing Anthony Joshua on social media after the fight, and actually called him out. So that would actually be a very good fight, a very, very solid good fight, because no one has ever stopped, the Deontay Wilder thing, the shenanigans with Malik Scott versus Deontay Wilder. If you didn't see the fight, But Malik Scott versus Anthony Joshua would be a very good fight, because Malik Scott, if you ever heard of a NBA player called Andrew Bynum, he's not in the NBA anymore, but he was a center with such promise. But the only thing about him was he played when he wanted to play. He was the type of NBA player, basketball player that was so good, but he wanted to do all kind of other shit that didn't have anything to do with boxing. That's kind of reminds me of Malik Scott. He's like the Andrew Bynum of the heavyweight division. He's very good and has the talent and skills to beat all the heavyweights, but I don't think that he really takes boxing that seriously. I don't really think he wakes up every day and say, I want to be an undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. So I would like to see him versus a Malik Scott, and it's a fight that politically it can happen and would be a big fight for both. Malik Scott just won his last fight against Tony Thompson. Anthony Joshua can't fight Tony Thompson because Tony Thompson is fighting Luis Ortiz. Let's go down the list. Erkan Teeper. Well, he's in a whole heap of trouble with steroid allegations when he pretty much knocked David Price under the ropes. So it's not going to be him. Antonio Tarver, oh Lord, let's not even talk about him. He's having some crazy problems with money. Joseph Parker, we talked about him, ranked number 1 by the WBO. Anthony Joshua ranked number 2. Steve Cunningham is supposed to be moving down to cruiserweight. His last fight was a controversial fight against Antonio Tarver. When Antonio Tarver failed the drug test, we got Carlos Takam. Now, something is telling me that it may be Carlos Takam that he may be fighting next. I don't know. I don't know anything for sure, but something is telling me that, they might pick Carlos Takam. Who else? Zar Glaskov is injured. Dominic Breazeale, can't be him. He's an Al Heyman fighter. Just don't see that fight. It could be Bermane Stiverne. Bermane Stiverne ranked very high by the WBC. I believe number 3 or number 4. And that's pretty much it. Can't be Ruslan Chagiev because he's fighting Lucas Brown. Can't be Derek Chisora because Derek Chisora is fighting Kubrat Pulev. So really, when it comes to the heavyweight division, the pickings are pretty slim for Anthony Joshua at this point in time in his career. But he has to fight a bigger name fight, because now those names like the Michael Sprats are raw, and the Kevin Johnsons, you can't fight those caliber of guys anymore. With all the support surrounding this dude and the successful pay-per-view and with the arenas that he's selling out, it's time to step it up. So who is he going to fight? I don't know. I'm thinking either Malik Scott, Carlos Takam, Charles Martin, or who else? It was one more name. Malik Scott, Charles Martin, who else? Yeah, that's pretty much it. Carlos Takam, Malik Scott, or Charles Martin. I believe it's going to be one of those 3. Eddie Hearn has said on Twitter that they've been talking to whoever the opponent's is team, and they're just drawing up the paperwork, and it's going to be announced soon. I'm T Street Controversy. This is T Street Controversy Live. I cover every single major fight live. Please subscribe.